It is a way most of us see one of the most powerful countries in the Middle East. Protests and provocations, sanctions and assassination. My earliest memories of the country of Iran go back to the Shah and American hostages, blindfolded and used as bargaining chips. But the United States' involvement in Iran goes back much farther. It is a Middle East relationship that has often been rocky. And as we sit here just days after missiles were fired on a base housing American military personnel, where do we stand in this complicated tit for tat? Are things really calming down, or is the threat of war playing out in a Middle Eastern hotbed that is still simmering? We hope to get a better understanding of the United States-Iran relationship in this program, a joint effort of KSAT 12 News and Trinity University. One of the central questions, does tension with the United States and Iran get us closer to World War III? It is a conversation with Dr. Sussan Siavoshi, the Chapman Cox Professor of International Relations at Trinity University. And I want to point out, we love the people that are with us on the live stream at KSAT.com. We are also joined by people on the many Trinity outlets, yes, Facebook and their live stream and their OTT as well. Yes. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. Thank you.
You are in the unique position of being an Iranian American. You were born in Iran.
That's right.
Talk about what that means for you.
Oh, in relation to this tension?
Just as a person.
As a person. Well, I love both countries. I was born in Iran, but I chose to live in the United States. My career was shaped in the United States. What is really heartbreaking for me is the long-standing tension that you spoke about, and that is what sometimes defined my life as an American Iranian. Personally, I've never felt either threatened or when the tension flares up, but I know that as a community we have this perpetual angst in some ways that ever since the revolution, this is always under the surface, if not on the surface, and that is sort of problematic. One would like to, the two countries that one loves to be in a better relationship. So that is something that I miss dearly.
Your hope is that Iran and the United States would eventually have some type of at least diplomatic relations, or
yes,
at least recognize each other.
Absolutely, that's my fondest hope. Whether it's going to happen or not is difficult to say. It's difficult to predict, but I can't see any other real solution to this relationship.
Are you still in contact with people who live in Iran?
Yes, I am. I am in contact. My sister lives in Iran. Right now she's in Germany, actually, but I have friends. I have relatives who live in Iran, and yes, I am.
What is the average, this is a question that I have off the top, what does the average Iranian think about America and the American people? I'm not talking about the Ayatollah, I'm not talking about the government leaders, the average Iranian.
Well, I don't know whether there is such a thing as an average Iranian, because a country of 80 million, there are lots of opinions. Some of them are well-educated opinion about United States. Some have idealistic vision of United States, and some are very distrustful of United States. But what is important for us to know in this country, that the caricature of this angry man raising their fist and saying death to America is not what Iran is all about. Iranians, like us, are ordinary people. They love their children. They think about what they should have for dinner at night. They would like to live in peace and harmony. Now, whether that's always possible or not is a different question. but an average Iranian, if you ask me, I would say it's like an average American.
Yeah.
Would like to have a comfortable life, make a living for themselves and their children. And so what is happening at this moment with the sanctions and really awful economic situation, which even medicines is sometimes sanctioned. So average Iranian are very stressed out about this. And they don't blame just United States, they blame their own government as well. So it's very interesting. In the latest protest, the University of Amir Kabir in Tehran, I don't remember the exact name of the university, but there was a statement where the student who were protesting against the handling of Ukraine aircraft, that tragically,
was shot down.
Shut down. They didn't just say death to our government, which sometimes you hear in some protests. They blamed both the reckless act of Trump administration as well as the problems with the government. So they see it both as a problem of internal oppression and imperialism.
Yeah, and one of the big differences between Iran and the United States, the forms of government. I mean, am I wrong in describing Iranian's government as authoritarian?
You're not wrong, but what does it mean to have an authoritarian system? It's actually a very complicated system. If you look at the Constitution, of course, in practice it differs, and it differs from time to time.
Yeah.
And it has authoritarian elements to it. It has a theological or theocratic element to it, but it also has democratic republican element to it. But once Iran feels, or the leaders feels insecure, both domestically and outside, then the autocratic element become much more pronounced, and most of them have the levers of powers in their hand. But it's not as, we can't just say, okay, it's authoritarian and leave it there and understand what's going on within the system.
Well, let's talk about some of the questions that we have. We have some great questions that we got on Twitter, on our SAQ thing on KSAT.com, as well as through Facebook, and we're hoping to still get questions as this discussion goes on.
Sure.
But what brought on the new round of tension between the United States and Iran, in your opinion?
I would say that we should start with 2018, when President Trump decided to exit unilaterally from JCPOA, which stand for
the
Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which is a nuclear deal between the 5 permanent members of the Security Council plus Germany. And this agreement was to put severe limitation and control system on Iran's nuclear activity in exchange for sanction relief.
Right.
And it was working. Iran was hoping that at some point this would lead to a greater integration with the rest of the world, particularly the reformists within Iran were hoping for that. Now, what is the intention for this exit? Why did it happen? It happened, or the goal was to put maximum pressure on the Iranian state to either through crippling economic sanction to either cave in and retract from regional engagement, offensive or defensive, depending on your point of view, and also either that or regime change. People rising up and revolting against the system. And Iran, for a year, just didn't do anything, hoping that European will salvage the deal. It didn't happen, so Iran started to show muscles, to put mines on Saudi tankers, to attack the oil facilities in Saudi Arabia. But it was still quite careful not to have casualties. So this is the background, and then there are immediate reasons, like the death of a contractor, and
right, and then the assassination of,
and then the assassination of Soleimani.
The assassination of this top-ranking general
Yes.
In Iran. Was the U.S. justified legally and morally to do this? That's
Okay.
I know, a tough question to ask.
Well, I'm not a legal expert, but I have listened to those who are legal experts. If you look at the international law, the idea is that you can do this kind of action in self-defense. But self-defense means that the danger has to be imminent, a response necessary and proportional. Now, the Trump administration in the beginning argued that it was an imminent threat, but as days passed, we realized that the discourse changed, partially because of the response of some of the critics, including people in the Congress who were Republican, like Mark Lee. But I think the most challenging thing for the Trump administration was sort of the double talk or different discourse within the administration, because President Trump came and says, well, there were imminent threat against 4 embassies,
right.
And then Defense Secretary says that I haven't seen those actual threats. It's probable, but I haven't seen it. How could a defense secretary haven't seen this? So they changed the discourse and argued otherwise. So if you take that, that is against the international law. Another thing is that based on international law, you have to have respect for the sovereignty of the country where attack happened. And so Iraqis were not consulted, and Iraq Prime Minister actually
because this happened in Baghdad.
That. Yes,
the assassination actually happened in Baghdad.
In Baghdad. Yes.
Yeah. Let's talk about not so much the legal or the moral right, but what kind of guy Soleimani was. I mean, if you listen to United States leaders, they will tell you he was connected with many terrorist groups who have carried out attacks that have killed Americans, and that he was a guy that needed to go.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Well, needed to go from whose point of view, of course, but
well, not so much that, but
yes.
I mean the terrorist ties.
Let me explain. Soleimani was a person who came to age, or was his worldview was very much informed by the Iran-Iraq war, where Iran was basically alone, and Iraq has all this support, particularly including the United States support, even when it used chemical weapons. So Soleimani and others like him felt that Iran is vulnerable, and that vulnerability actually threatened the territorial integrity of Iran. So with this idea, he was a very smart guy. He was a very daring person, and he became the head of Quds force, which is the external wing of Revolutionary Guard, and he was in that position for 22 years. He did something that we didn't like he made Hezbollah, which we consider as a terrorist group, a very potent military force. He, by the invitation of Assad, went into Syria and helped the Assad regime to survive. But he also did things that we like, and we actually did it together in some ways, parallel, but and that was the fight against ISIS. He was instrumental for one of the most important person to attack ISIS and push them out of Mosul and Kirkuk and other places. And we at that time really, there was a gentlemanly agreement not to deal with each other, not to kill each other. So there was that. And let me finish this by saying that he was, in fact, up to then, he was basically working in some ways with American, but after the exit from JCPOA, that Iran changed its approach eventually, and he, along with some other, particularly hardliner, decided that this was not working.
Yeah.
And they showed their military muscle.
Yeah. You know, usually when you say something in the past, like World War III, at least to me, when it hits my ears, I think hyperbole.
It is hyperbole, I have to say.
And so my question is, are you convinced that both sides have kind of backed away at this point from an armed confrontation?
Well, at the moment it seems that way, but there are a lot of things that trouble me and I am worried about because sometimes escalation is not just based on what two leaders or two countries' elite would like to pursue.
Or missiles flying through the
air. Because I know that President Trump, after Iran's missile attack, was saying that, okay, well, everything's fine, nobody got injured or hurt, although there were some hurt. But Iran was also, before sending the missile, informed Abdul Mahdi, the prime minister of Iraq, that we are going to do that,
right, so they had
knowing
warning.
well that they're going to tell the administration. But things might get out of hand, and I'm worried about two things. One is we shouldn't forget that a very important Iraqi militia leader also was killed.
Right.
And even though those militias are supported by Iran, but they might, without the consent of Iran, do their own revenge, take their own revenge, and that is problematic because we here can blame Iran for it,
right.
and then that might escalate. Another thing which I think is somewhat even more problematic in the long term is that if we squeeze Iran a lot, and the leaders think that they're desperate people do desperate things, and if we have a war, and if they escalate and we go into a real war, this is not going to be a picnic. It's not even a war like a war in Iraq, which we're still there for 18 years later. We haven't accomplished much. In fact, ISIS was created as an important threat to us and to others. The destabilization. Iran has managed, because of its isolation. Iran is a strategically lonely country. So its missile defense and its experience in asymmetrical warfare make Iran a very potent and formidable foe, not in a conventional way, but in a guerrilla, asymmetrical way.
Yeah. Okay. I appreciate your answer to those questions, and
You're
that's
welcome.
because that's when you hear about Iraqi militia, a lot of people are also concerned about Hezbollah, and that some of those other terrorist groups may carry out some sort of attacks that somehow tie back to Iran as well. Right. We got a lot of questions from people on our SAQ, and I want to get to some of those questions. One of them that I want to get to right off the top is, why is only one religious belief allowed in Iran? This is submitted by Anonymous, and the reason I bring this up is because I'm not an Iranian expert, but you are. This is not entirely accurate.
That's not true. Yes, it is not accurate. In fact, according to Islam and by Iranian, there is people of the book. Christian, Jews, Zoroastrian are people of the book, and of course some others like Buddhists and Hindus are also tolerated. Now, do they have the same kind of political right? No, and the most persecuted religious group is the Baha'is, that are basically, as I said, sort of persecuted. They can't go to universities. Their property is sometimes in danger. But as far as the question is concerned, no, it's not accurate.
Yeah, there's not one religion that's allowed, but there's really one religion that's in power.
There is one religion, Islam, which is the predominant religion, and people who adhere to it have rights. Although, as I said, the Jews, the Christian, and the Zoroastrian also have representation in the government, but as minorities, they are vulnerable.
Right. Okay, here's another good question. Benjamin Gonzalez asks, where does Iran get their weapons?
Well, that's an interesting question. Most of Iran's weapon is made in Iran because, as I said, Iran was strategically lonely. And therefore, after it realized that it cannot rely, during the Iran-Iraq war, cannot rely on any country to give them arms, although some did, Russia did to some extent, and China. But the missile, of course, you can get some element or some component from other countries, but Iran itself has made some of its important.
They make their own tanks. They make their own.
They made a lot of their armament.
Am I correct that Syria is really considered their biggest ally in the area? Assad in particular?
Assad, Syria and Iran go a long way.
Yeah.
Because during Iran-Iraq war, Syria was the only Arab country that supported Iran or didn't support Iraq. As I said, Iran feels, whether one accepts it or not, feels sort of contained. U.S., it's around Iran, and then you have hostile forces in Persian Gulf. I mean, why they're hostile is a long story. I'm not going there. But the fact of the matter, Iran is worried about them. Iran is also worried about Israel. So what it does is that it tries to create a corridor from Iran to Iraq to Syria to Lebanon. So, for example, if Israel decides to attack Iran, as it said many times, whether it does or not, it's a different question, that the Hezbollah will, so Iran can deliver weapons to Hezbollah through Syria, so that is an important geopolitical area for Iran.
It's interesting that you bring up the motivations of feeling isolated and not having necessarily someone that's going to provide them weapons. They provide them for themselves. Could also explain why someone like Soleimani is reaching out to terrorist groups, because he doesn't, like you said, desperate people do desperate things. If that's your motivation, you're going to reach out to whoever you have to feel secure.
Okay, Soleimani didn't think of those people as terrorists. Iran's narrative is that these are the axis of resistance. Okay. Resistance against, to them, an imperial power and its allies.
Yes, so that's how he saw them. The rest of the world sees them differently.
Well,
most of the rest of the world.
Yes, that's right.
All right, the next question from our SAQ, why can't the president get troops out of the Middle East? This is from Leslie Martinez. She asked specifically about troops in Iran, but to clarify, the United States troops are in Iraq.
Right.
So I guess why shouldn't the president get troops out of the Middle East, I think is a question.
I think President Trump really wanted to. And there are actually, I have some conservative friends from the military who are saying that we don't mind if U.S. get out of Iraq. 18 years is enough to be there. But the issue is ISIS for the most part. The remnant of ISIS is there. And that is why there are things that connect Iran and United States should connect them in a harmonious way, fighting with ISIS. So that is an important, I think this is the most important reason why the forces of US are there. There is an element of Kurdish issue, which is actually more pertinent to Syrian Kurds than to Iraqi Kurds, because those are two different parts of the Kurdish population. So that's probably why it's the ISIS that's the most important reason, I think.
So this leads into the next question.
Okay.
And this is from Raphael, who asks, what course of action would you take going forward? And so if you're the
leader of which country?
Let's say you're the leader of the United States. What course of action would you take going forward?
I think the course of action is that I will think of war as the last resort. So I would see whether there are element of diplomacy. I will get in touch with the allies and try to create a diplomatic sort of corridor so we can talk to the Iranians. It's hard right now. I mean, President Trump, after Iran missile attack, went on TV, and it started sort of. I never allowed Iran to have nuclear weapon, but toward the end, he said that he gave an olive branch, but it is just so sort of mixed with threat that no one can understand in Iran where he's coming from. But at the moment, this is what I think. I think the increasing sanction is detrimental. I think we should scale back the sanction, talk to our allies, talk to Russia, talk to China, talk to Turkey, and see whether there can be some sort of diplomatic way to go forward.
You realize that our viewers are putting you on the spot there, wanting to know exactly what you would do. And
yeah.
So I want to thank our SAQ people that have chimed in on the KSAT app, KSAT.com, SAQ, San Antonio questions that they've sent in. Thank you, Raphael, for that one. Here's another one. And we actually got a similar question to this on Twitter as well.
Oh.
Why did the CIA execute a coup in Iran in 1953? Why not peace? And it was the United States and the UK that basically started that coup. That's considered history, and I want to thank Omar for sending this in. Yeah, I think Omar is the same person that put it in on Twitter too when we posted this out. Talking about the coup in 1953 that a lot of people don't necessarily know about.
That's very interesting. You know, one of the things that I always tell my students and others, I said, when does history start? The tension. Is it the hostage crisis in 1979, or is it the coup in 1953? Why United States involved itself in this coup? You have to come take my class because it's a whole semester. But just in a nutshell, is that we were going through a Cold War at that time. The idea was that you're either with us or you're against us. And Iran wanted to be non-aligned. And so that's one thing, the political aspects. But the other thing was oil. Of course, Iran nationalized its oil. United States in the beginning supported Iran, but then partially with UK convinced United States. But we also have a change in the administration in the United States, and Foster Dulles and others came, and they were very ardent Cold Warrior, and they didn't trust a government which was democratic but maybe weak, and they wanted to have a strong man who would be a bulwark against the Soviet Union.
This was
a
democratic government in Iran that was overthrown.
Yes, it was a democratic government in Iran in 1953. We overthrew the democratic government and reinstated an authoritarian figure in Iran.
Yeah. What do you, when you saw the assassination, heard the news of the assassination of Soleimani, and then you saw the missiles going from Iran into Iraq, what was going through your mind when that was happening?
Well, when the assassination happened, it was the weekend, and my friend read that to me, and I was shocked. And my first reaction was disbelief and shock, and then I said, oh my God, it's just gonna get bad and worse, and I was very afraid. I was very afraid for how Iran will react to this because of the importance of Soleimani, who was very powerful man. I don't know whether he was the second most powerful man, but he was basically very powerful man. And you saw his popularity when it came, when millions of people pour into the street. And I knew exactly that Iranian leader, whether they wanted or not, could not answer. And they had to do something direct from Iran, because Iran MO up to then was that just sort of do it in a way that can create a deniability for them. But that's why the missiles were sent. But Iran didn't want escalation, because Iran knows that cannot win a conventional war against U.S. And I don't think U.S. want a military confrontation direct with Iran. But
after the Ukrainian jet was shot down after it took off from Tehran airport, there were protests against the Iranian government.
Yes.
Your read on those protests, does it mean anything?
Well, you know, the protest, of course, was somehow also related. It was a tragic event. Everybody was heartbroken. The way Iran hid the information from its people, that was really awful. Many of these protests, first of all, this protest was very different from the protest that happened a few months ago. That was mostly for economic reason, when Iran hiked the oil, gasoline price.
Went up like 300%.
Right,
yeah.
Right. And this was mostly a middle-class, well-educated protest, this one. So when you think about what does it mean, I don't think it means that regime is in a dire danger of being toppled, because as we saw in the Soleimani funerals, there were a lot of people who still either support the regime but don't want Iran to be disintegrated or go into another revolution or what have you. And the fact of the matter is that opposition in Iran is not, there are different opposition. One is a class opposition where the poorer people, those who are really hit by economic sanctions and and corruption, etc., are demanding change. And then there is a cities, Tehran, middle class protests that want freedom of expression and all sorts of other things. Whether this will lead to another revolution as the Trump administration hoped, I don't think it will.
Yeah. I'm going to give you the final word here. People that are watching at home, who are watching this either live or will watch it on our OTT KSAT TV app or on the Trinity apps, what's your message that you want them to take home about the relationship between the United States and Iran?
I think I would like my American compatriot really hold their leaders, whether Democrats or Republican, accountable. Going to war is not, as I said, is not a picnic. We have to make sure that we use all the other avenues and ways that we can before we go to war. And for that, I would like to urge people to educate themselves, to read different perspectives from different areas of the world. And then I would like to also, in order to exhaust all the diplomatic ways, for us to think of these people as people, not just caricatures, not just as angry men, not just as mullahs, and understand, humanize them, and also understand that the other side might have some legitimate security fear and threat. And the question is that how do we put all these things together and try to form an opinion about the situation and then relay our message to our leaders.
Well, I hope the dialogue that you and I have had and with some of the viewers out there has led us down that path.
I hope so too.
And I just want to say, having done some research for this interview on Iran and the history of Iran, I knew some of it, but it is a fascinating country. I mean, you're talking about Greek influence, you're talking about Italian influence, you're talking about, of course, the Muslim influence. I mean, it's a fascinating country.
And vice versa.
And vice versa, yeah. So, Dr. Sussan Siavoshi from Trinity University, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us, students and just average South Texans alike. This will live on KSAT TV. That's it for our live stream. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.